As you can see, I have really read the heck out of this. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and we have a book review today, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, and it took me about 1.5 years to actually read it. What happened was I got a little over halfway through it. In fact, I was well into volume 3, and then I realized that I was not getting the full benefit out of what I was reading as I was reading it for the first time, and I could tell that I was coming upon some pretty big spoilers, and I stopped and started it over. This one is actually probably more difficult than the other Jane Austen books I've read. So I've read Pride and Prejudice and I've read Emma. And before I go into some spoilers discussing this book, I just want to give anyone who might be trying to read it or interested in reading it some little tips and tricks that helped me when I was trying to read this. Okay, so when I was about to read this book, I went into it knowing absolutely nothing about what it was about. Don't do that. Here's what I think that you should know about the plot before going into the book. Number one, you have two main dynamic characters in this book. So if you read Emma or you read Pride and Prejudice, yes, in Pride and Prejudice there are 5 sisters, but Elizabeth is really the only one that's going through some big transformative journey. Yes, Jane has a romance, Lydia has a romance, but it's really Elizabeth who we are focusing on the most. In this book, there are essentially 2 Elizabeths, 2 main characters that are going through a dynamic character arc change. So there are 2 girls who are going to start the book being someone completely different than when you finish the book. The main lesson of this book is trying to find a balance between thinking with your head and thinking with your heart. That is the sense versus the sensibility. So you have these 2 sisters. One of them, well, technically there are 3 sisters because they do have a 3rd sister who is not a dynamic character that's going to change. So she's there, don't get confused about that. But the 2 sisters who are going through a dynamic process of self-development, both of them, their journeys are going to mirror each other's. So one of them thinks very aggressively with her head and the other one thinks very aggressively with her heart. And the whole point of the book is that it's not comparing one versus the other, like this is the right way to be, this is the wrong way to be. Both of these characters are making mistakes by only prioritizing either their sense or their sensibility. And the point of the novel is to see the benefits and the drawbacks of both ways of thinking, and really what you need is a blend of both for a successful romantic relationship. Since you have 2 main characters, essentially, you have twice as many men to keep up with. 2 of these men actually have the same first name. So thankfully, they are not really important in the sense that they are not the main love interest, but you still have to keep them separate because it's kind of integral to the plot to understand who is in the room when certain conversations are happening. There is also a bit of manipulation that is happening in this book, and it is told from a 3rd-person limited point of view. So if you're not paying attention in each chapter to what is being said, who is in the room, and what is going on, you're going to be completely lost. So every single chapter, take it slow, read it slowly, and really understand what is going on. The narrator herself is going to be a little bit unreliable here and there because she's going to be thinking that something is happening even though what she thinks is happening isn't really what's going on. But it is really funny and a really satisfying read. So if you can stomach all of that, I highly recommend giving this book a shot. So many jaw-dropping moments in this book where you were like, oh my God, wait, he's at her door right now? So if you do the work to really understand this book, it's totally worth it. So that concludes the spoiler-free part of this video. I am now going to go into a deep dive about this novel from start to finish. I loved this book so much. There are 3 sisters. 2 of them are old enough to be thinking about getting married, and their father dies. The 3 girls and their mother don't have very much money. They've got a very wealthy half-brother who their father has asked to please help take care of them. Half-brother is very much the type to... he wants to do something for them without inconveniencing himself. So morally, he wants to do something, but realistically, he doesn't want to inconvenience himself. It's very, very easy for his very selfish wife to convince him to do pretty much next to nothing for his 3 sisters, half-sisters. His wife has a brother, Edward, who ends up taking a bit of a liking to Eleanor, one of the sisters. And Eleanor also likes him too. She is very rational though, very rational. It's hard for her to show emotion, and it's even harder for her to acknowledge them herself even. Marianne, on the other hand, is always ready to feel her emotions to the fullest extent. And that means she doesn't really have much of a poker face, so if propriety needs to be kept up, it really falls to Eleanor to kind of not show any emotion and keep the peace and do what's right, because Marianne's emotions are always on her face. Wife of their half-brother, her name is Fanny. She does not want Edward and Eleanor to be together because she wants Edward to marry a rich woman. So she makes this sly comment. She was like, oh, I wouldn't want Edward to be tempted by someone of lesser status or whatever. And Eleanor's mom is, of course, really insulted by all of this. So when their cousin, I believe it is a cousin, offers, hey, I've heard that you guys were just suffering the death of that man and your family. Would you like to come and stay at our guest cottage here with us? They are ready to just take up that offer and head over there. So they move away to this cute little cottage, and it's much smaller than, the house that they were in before, and it's not as grand or as wealthy, but it's nice. And Eleanor and Marianne are out exploring the grounds, and a storm comes in, and as they are trying to run back into the house to beat the storm, Marianne trips and falls and hurts her ankle, and a dashing young man on a horse comes to her rescue, carries her inside the house, and makes sure that she is okay, and it's all very heroic and romantic and beautiful, and he comes to check on her every day after, and the two of them just throw themselves at each other basically, and he says everything right, she says everything right, they're in agreement on everything, they are playing music together, they have the same opinions on everything. Meanwhile, there's really no one here that is at Eleanor's wavelength when it comes to just intellectual stimulation. Their cousins are nice enough, like the cousin and his wife and their children, but he's the type who just likes to see and be seen. And she's the type to care more about appearances than substance. She really only talks about her kids and nothing else, and that's fine. That's not a crime by any means, but for someone who likes to think very deeply, that type of company is kind of a struggle. His wife's the Middletons. They're the Middletons. Her mother is also there, and her mother takes a significant liking to both the girls, all 3 of the girls, and their mother, who are staying at the guest cottage. As you can see, I'm rattling off a lot of characters, so when you're reading this, it does get tricky. There's also, oh, I just hit my elbow on this thing. Okay. There's also another man, Colonel Brandon, who is a bit of an older man, but he is at least interesting for Eleanor to talk to. And he loves Marianne, apparently. But Marianne does not like him at all. She's like, he's old and he's just like really boring and he's not as lively. He kind of sulks a lot. Like, she is not into that. She likes Willoughby, the guy who has come and saved her from falling and hurting her ankle. And the way Willoughby is acting with Marianne, he is doing all of these things that imply that they're engaged. So he is calling her by her real name without like any of the propriety that they have for addressing each other, which is something that you're not supposed to do back then, like unless you're married. And he is giving her things. He wants to give her a horse. He gives her a horse, but then Eleanor says, you have to give it back because we don't have enough money or place for a horse. And he was like, but that's okay. Like, I'll just keep it for you. And then once you do get your place, and it'll be this place. And he takes her to this house that he says she's going to be the mistress of once they get married. He was like, yeah, when you come here, like, you know, there'll be place for the horse. So everyone thinks that they're engaged. Everyone, the older lady, the Middleton, her name is Miss Jennings. Mrs. Middleton's mother, her name is Miss Jennings. And she is always making jokes about everything. And she's constantly making jokes about how they're in love and they're gonna get married, they're as good as married, blah, blah, blah. And then he leaves with no warning. So he has to leave abruptly. Kind of around this time, Colonel Brandon also has to leave abruptly. And he leaves under very mysterious circumstances, and he leaves right in the middle of robbing everyone of a beautiful day out on a property, which they're gonna need him in order to get to. So he disgruntles a lot of people, but he ends up leaving. And, you know, after some time, and, you know, Willoughby's gone, Eleanor's kind of, you know, not really having anyone to talk to. Edward comes by, and Eleanor's excited about it, but he starts acting really weird while he's there. Like, you know, before he was, you know, very lively, and he was obviously interested in Eleanor, and she's interested in him, but he's acting a little bit weird and like distanced or whatever. And she's not sure why he's acting that way. It also kind of seems that he stumbled that way by accident. So that's really weird, and that happens. Two new girls come to the neighborhood, and they are apparently relatives of Mrs. Jennings. Lucy Steele and her sister, they're very, not as elegant, not as refined. They are a bit crass sometimes, and they are very ready to flatter. They're really, really, really ready to flatter anyone with money. So the Middletons, they're really flattering Mrs. Middleton, and she is all for it. Like, she loves feeling superior. They're flattering her children. That's her favorite subject to talk about. So they're on good terms with the Middletons for sure. And John Middleton doesn't know what hit him. So he says, oh, they're lovely girls. Of course they are, right? Eleanor sees right through this. She's not particularly fond of them, but of course she keeps the peace. Marianne is just disgusted, but of course Eleanor has to take it upon herself to make sure that there's a little bit of damage control. Marianne's not just openly offending people by wearing her emotions like that. So as you can see, Eleanor really does end up taking the most of the emotional work that has to happen between her and her sister. and even with her mother sometimes. And Lucy takes Eleanor aside and was like, you just seem like such a great girl. And Eleanor's like, yeah, okay, sure. And she's like, I have a secret I have to tell you. And she's like, okay, sure, why not? She's trying to be nice. And Lucy says, well, I heard that you know Edward Ferrars. And she was like, yes, I know him. And she was like, well, you know, we're engaged. What? Like, this girl is engaged to Edward, and Eleanor at first, like, she doesn't know what to make of it. She was like, is this girl lying? Like, can she really be engaged? Can Edward really be wanting this girl? Like, you know what I'm saying? So she says, you have to keep my secret. And Eleanor's like, yes, I have to keep your secret engagement a secret out of my own personal honor and dignity. And now Lucy wants to confide in Eleanor about everything. She's like, well, he writes back to me, but sometimes, you know, we have to be in secret because of his mother, and I've never met her, and blah, blah, blah. And these girls are much poorer than Eleanor and her sisters. So Eleanor is thinking, oh my gosh, like, Edward's sister and Edward's mother, she's never actually met them before. But she's thinking, like, they didn't want her to marry me. They didn't want him to marry me because of how poor I am. How is Edward engaged secretly to this girl? Anyway, so the seasons change and Mrs. Jennings invites the girls with her to, I don't know which city it is. I'm really iffy on all the geography out there, but they go out to the city, the place where Willoughby is, and Edward is there, Edward's family is there. So they go out to the city, and Marianne is thrilled because she wants to see Willoughby again. The Steeles are also going to be there for a time. So they get to the city and they're setting everything up, and Marianne is of course writing to Willoughby and saying, hey, I'm here, stop by anytime. And he's ignoring all of her letters. And then what happens is they go to a party and he's there after many, many days of him ignoring her letters. He's there, and, you know, Marianne wants to just go to him, and Eleanor's like, you know, have some composure. Like, we don't know why he's been avoiding you. Like, are you engaged? Like, are you engaged to him? Like, she wants to ask her that, but also Marianne is very touchy, I guess is the word. So Willoughby sees Marianne, and basically just acts like he doesn't even really know her that well. And he's standing with this woman, and he's like, you know, talking to her very closely, and Marianne is distraught. So she starts feeling physically sick, and they just arrange to take her home, Eleanor and Marianne. Marianne doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep. They get another letter from Willoughby saying that, I'm sorry if what I did ever seemed like it meant more than it did. And he returns like her lock of hair that she gave him or whatever. And he returns all of her letters basically that she was sending him. It's a nightmare. Then Eleanor and Mrs. Jennings get invited to a dinner with, I believe it is, Edward is not there, but it is Edward's sister, Edward's mother, who Eleanor has never met. The Steeles are also coming because the Middletons just love them. And the Middletons get along really well with Fanny and her mother because they are very much cut from the same cloth. They're beautiful, elegant on the outside, not much to talk about on the inside, not much to inspire. The kids are a great topic or whatever. So they're basically the same person in a different font. So they, on account of hearing how well the Middletons favor the Steeles, invite the Steeles as well. And so Eleanor doesn't really want to go. Marianne's not feeling well, of course, because she's heartbroken and just not eating or whatever. Eleanor just goes with Mrs. Jennings to this dinner. Fanny and her mother, this is Edward's sister Fanny and his mother, they don't like Eleanor at all, right? Because they know that Eleanor likes Edward and Edward likes Eleanor, probably, most likely. And they want him to get married to Mrs. Morton, who is a completely separate woman, who's very wealthy, who's going to add a lot to their fortune. They already have a big fortune, by the way. So Edward makes up some weird excuse, some bullshit excuse, to not go to this dinner. Lucky him. But the rest of these people show up. Miss Morton's not in attendance. And Fanny and her mother just, in an effort to slight Eleanor, praise the Steeles very heavily. They're like, oh my gosh, like, these girls are so great, blah, blah, blah. I believe, what's his name? Colonel Brandon is also there. And so he is on Eleanor's side a little bit here and there. He is also very hyper aware of what's going on with the women. So he is clued in to everything. So he is taking Eleanor's side when he needs to. The two of them have become very good, reasonable friends. And Eleanor is now shocked and a little bit amused to discover how awful Fanny and her mother must be as people, because they are willing to put poor Eleanor through all of this, even to the point of flattering back these girls, these social climbing girls, who are just very, very, oh, we love you, blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, oh, we love you too. And just basically excluding Eleanor. They're only nice to her to slight Eleanor. Like, we're gonna be nice to her, but we're not gonna be nice to you. And look at how she is, and look at how you are, and you are worse than that. But Eleanor just finds the whole thing funny. She has since kind of put Edward out of her mind, so she thinks. She's like, I'm over him, whatever, and look at these awful people who I don't even have to associate with anymore because, you know, they're not going to be my in-laws, thank goodness. And then Colonel Brandon, this is all not in chronological order, by the way, but Colonel Brandon confesses to Eleanor, hey, there's something you need to know about Willoughby. And apparently Willoughby has a child and a girl who he just knocked up. And knocking someone up in this time period, oh my gosh. So, and he's just like not caring about her, didn't marry her, nothing. And he's actually been cut off of the patronage, you know, the person who was supporting him in that neighborhood where he rescued Marianne, because she found out about his child and the woman who he had the child with, who he's not marrying. And she said, I'll forgive you if you marry her. And he said no. And that's why he had to leave that neighborhood so abruptly with Marianne, heartbroken, because he no longer had a place to stay there because she had cut him off. And apparently Colonel Brandon has a connection to that woman who Willoughby had the child with. And it's said very eloquently here, every perusal only served to increase her abhorrence of the man, and so bitter were her feelings against him that she dared not trust herself to speak, lest she might wound Marianne still deeper by treating their disengagement, not as a loss to her of any possible good, but as an escape from the worst and most irredeemable of evils, a connection for life with an unprincipled man, as a deliverance the most real, a blessing the most important. What a line. So at this point, once Eleanor knows this and tells it to Marianne, Marianne at first is skeptical to believe it, but obviously she has to come to terms with the truth. But this marks the beginning of Marianne's transformation, where she has to now make peace with the fact that whatever she fell for was not real love, and she used her heart a little bit too much and her brain a little bit too little. And she is just fortunate to not be in that other girl's position. So Eleanor runs into Mr. John Dashwood, who is the man who should have done more for them as per her dying father's wishes, and who has since just been trying to make sure other people do more for them, to relieve him of the guilt of not having done more himself. So he is commenting on how wealthy Colonel Brandon is and how he and Eleanor make a great pair and she would do well to marry him. He is saying that, oh, Mrs. Jennings seems wealthy and she's taken such a big liking to you, so surely you'll be included in the will. And it's like, you have so much money and you refuse to give any to your family, so you're hoping other people do? Like, that is so awful. There is one line here that I thought is great. Eleanor agreed to it all, for she did not think he deserved the compliment of rational opposition. I love Jane Austen. She is so funny and witty. Ow, how many times am I gonna do that? So they're in the company of a Mrs. Dennison, and he's thinking to himself, the consideration of Mrs. Dennison's mistake in supposing his sisters their guests had suggested the propriety of their being really invited to become such, while Mrs. Jennings' engagements kept her from home. Mrs. Jennings' other daughter ended up having a child, so she ended up spending some time over there with them, and so the Dashwoods, Eleanor, Marianne, they were staying at Mrs. Jennings' house in the city, but they were now staying with the Middletons because, you know, Mrs. Jennings is off with her other daughter, while Mrs. Jennings' engagements kept her from home. That's what they mean by that. The experience would be nothing, the inconvenience not more, and it was altogether an attention which the delicacy of his conscience pointed out to be requisite to its complete enfranchisement from his promise to his father. Fanny, his wife, was startled at the proposal, and she says, I do not see how it can be done without affronting Lady Middleton, for they spend every day with her, otherwise I should be exceedingly glad to do it. You know I am always ready to pay them any attention in my power, as my taking them out this evening shows, but they are Lady Middleton's visitors. How can I ask them away from her? Oh, wow, she's so nice. Stay with me though. Her husband, but with great humility, did not see the force of her objection. They had already spent a week in this manner in Conduit Street, and Lady Middleton could not be displeased at their giving the same number of days to such near relations. Fanny paused a moment, and then with fresh vigor said, My love, I would ask them with all my heart if it was in my power, but I had just settled within myself to ask the Miss Steeles to spend a few days with us. They are very well behaved, good kind of girls, and I think the attention is due to them, as their uncle did so very well by Edward. That's how Lucy and Edward met, by the way. We can ask your sisters some other year, you know. But the Miss Steeles may not be in town anymore. I'm sure you will like them. Indeed, you do like them, you know very much already, and so does my mother, and they are such favorites with Harry. Harry is meant to inherit the estate that the Dashwoods were living in before they got the offer to move with their cousin. Mr. Dashwood was, of course, convinced. He saw the necessity of inviting the Mrs. Steeles immediately, and his conscience was pacified by the resolution of inviting his sisters another year. At the same time, however, slyly suspecting that another year could make the invitation needless by bringing Eleanor to town as Colonel Brandon's wife and Marianne as their visitor. Yeah, great. And then it says, Fanny, rejoicing in her escape and proud of the ready wit that had procured it, wrote the next morning to Lucy to request her company and her sisters for some days in Harley Street, as soon as Lady Middleton could spare them. And of course, Lucy is thrilled by this because she gets to spend time with Edward's sister and and his family. Well, this is all just working so well because they love her so much. And Eleanor hears about this, and she's at first a little taken aback because I think at this point she didn't actually believe that Lucy is really engaged to Edward and that her family really does like her. Like, she's thinking that his family is only pretending to like her, just like her, which she's right. Like, that's exactly what Fanny is doing here. When the note was shown to Eleanor, as it was within 10 minutes after its arrival, because Lucy thinks Eleanor is her best friend who she's able to confide in, and Eleanor is trying really hard to be that after being forced to hold this secret that she did not ask for to begin with. When the note was shown to Eleanor, as it was within 10 minutes after its arrival, it gave her for the first time some share in the expectations of Lucy, for such a mark of uncommon kindness vouchsafed on so short an acquaintance seemed to declare that the goodwill towards her arose from something more than merely malice against herself, and might be brought by the time and address to do everything that Lucy wished. Her flattery had already subdued the pride of Lady Middleton and made an entry into the close heart of Mrs. John Dashwood, Fanny. And these were the effects that laid upon the probability of greater. So the Steeles go to live with Fanny and Mr. John Dashwood, and her mother is there too, instead of the Dashwoods, because of Fanny's ego and nothing more. And what happens? They find out about Lucy being engaged to Edward, because Lucy's sister, in all her lack of propriety, just blurts it out. I'm gonna read the part where they find out. "Lord, my dear Miss Dashwood, have you heard the news?" Eleanor Dashwood. "No, ma'am, what is it?" "Something so strange, but you shall hear it all. When I got to Mr. Palmer's, I found Charlotte quite in a fuss about the child. She was sure it was very ill. It cried and fretted and was all over pimples." That is, the Palmers are Mrs. Jennings' daughter and her husband, and her child, who Mrs. Jennings is there with because her daughter has just had the baby. So I looked at it directly. "Lord, my dear," says I, "is nothing in the world but..." Okay, blah, blah, blah. Let's skip to the good part. They call the doctor. The doctor says, "I hope Mrs. Dashwood will do very well." "What, is Fanny ill?" "That is exactly what I said, my dear." "Lord," says I, "is Mrs. Dashwood ill?" And then it all came out. And the long and the short of the matter, by all I can learn, seems to be this. Mr. Edward Ferrars, the very young man I used to joke with you about, because she thought that Edward and Eleanor liked each other, and she was right. Mr. Edward Ferrars, it seems, has been engaged above this 12-month to my cousin Lucy. That's for you, my dear, and not a creature knowing a syllable of the matter except Nancy, Lucy's sister. Could you have believed such a thing possible? There is no great wonder in their liking one another, but that matters should be brought so forward between them and nobody suspect it. That is strange. I never happened to see them together, nor am I sure I should have found out it directly. Well, and so this was kept a great secret for fear of Mrs. Ferrars, and neither she nor your brother or sister suspected a word of the matter till this very morning. Poor Nancy, who you know is a well-meaning creature but no conjurer, popped it all out. Lord, thinks she to herself, they are all so fond of Lucy, to be sure they will make no difficulty about it. And so away she went to your sister, who was sitting all alone at her carpet work, while little suspecting what was to come, for she had just been saying to your brother only 5 minutes before that she thought to make a match between Edward and some lord's daughter or another, I forget who. So you may think what a blow it was to all her vanity and pride. She fell into violent hysterics immediately, with such screams as reached your brother's ears, and he was sitting in his own dressing room downstairs thinking about writing a letter to his steward in the country. So up he flew directly, and a terrible scene took place, for Lucy was come to them by that time, little dreaming of what was going on. Poor soul, I pity her. And I must say, I think she was used very hardly, for your sister scolded like any fury, and soon drove her into a fainting fit. She got so mad at Lucy that she fainted. Lucy fainted. Nancy, she fell upon her knees and cried bitterly, and your brother, he walked about the room and said he did not know what to do. Mrs. Dashwood declared that they should not stay a minute longer in the house, and your brother was forced to go down upon his knees too to persuade her to let them stay till they had packed up their clothes. Then she fell into hysterics again, and he was so frightened that he was sent for Mr. Donovan, the doctor, and Mr. Donovan found the house in all this uproar. I'm sorry, but that's so funny. So now the cat is out of the bag, and what happens is Eleanor and Lucy are at Mrs. Jennings' house where Eleanor is staying. She comes in to kind of, vent and confess about all of this because Eleanor is supposedly her dear friend. And then Edward walks in on both of them standing in the room. And this is the first time Eleanor and Edward are seeing each other while being in the city. Of course, Lucy has no idea that the two of them had or have or maybe still have, no one really knows, feelings for each other. Eleanor is obviously repressing everything, so no one, not even Eleanor's sister, knows that she's going through all of this. Her mother doesn't know. She's basically holding all of this in herself, and she just wishes Edward the best, and she just walks out of there keeping her composure as much as possible. And he is equally flustered and just kind of says thank you and leaves, which kind of sucks. So Edward's mother is so angry at Edward for doing this that she cuts him off entirely. She makes his brother Robert the heir to the fortune and says that you have to break off this engagement, and he says no, I'm not going to break off this engagement. They kick him out of the house, so he has to go and stay in a tavern or hotel or whatever. And when Eleanor hears about this, she does think that there is something noble, that he is willing to stand up to all of his relations and stomach the loss of his fortune just to be with Lucy, who is a woman that he supposedly loves. Lucy's sister ends up telling Eleanor that she was listening at the door when Edward and Lucy were talking, and she was saying that Edward was saying that he still loves her, but he's willing to break off the engagement since he has nothing now if Lucy would like someone better. But Lucy said no, she'll still have him even if he's poor, and Edward was really happy about that. And now Eleanor is just trying to make peace with the fact that, it's over, like he's gonna marry her and that's fine. And she's been trying so hard just to cut these feelings out for him and just get over it, but she's just not quite able to. Like, she's like, oh, but I still like him and I don't know why. Like, it sucks. It really does suck. So at this point, both Eleanor and Marianne are ready to get out of the city. Like, they want to be out of there between Willoughby and between, this whole thing with Edward. Like, they don't want to be around these people anymore, understandably so. They are going to make the journey to one of, I think it's Mrs. Palmer's house, Charlotte's house. They have like some sort of a vacation home that's kind of on the way back to their the little cottage that the Dashwoods are staying at, where their mother is still there. Making the journey there, and Marianne is feeling a little bit better. Like, she's kind of come to terms with it, with Willoughby, and it's like, you know what, he was an awful man anyway, and soon she'll be home, like, with her mother, and, everything will be fine. And Eleanor is still holding all of this in herself, but, soon she'll be away from the city. She won't have to hear about Edward. She won't have to ever see him again. He's gonna marry Lucy and they're gonna live happily ever after or whatever. And they stay there for a little while, and then Marianne catches a cold. And she's like, oh, it's fine. Like, it's just a cold. And Eleanor thinks it's fine, and everyone thinks it's fine, but it keeps getting worse. And it gets worse every day. And then it gets to the point where they have to call the doctor. And the doctor says she'll make a full recovery, but she's not making a full recovery. She's still getting worse. And it gets to the point where it's like, they think she's going to die. Marianne is going to die. Colonel Brandon is going with them. And they make the decision that Colonel Brandon is going to go back to the cottage and get their mother and bring her here. Marianne is just fighting for her life with this putrid fever is what they call it. And so Eleanor is staying up nights at a time. She's staying up by her bedside, trying to make sure that her breathing is good and just hoping that a miracle is gonna happen. And she hears the carriage showing up and she's like, oh, it's early. And it's probably Colonel Brandon. He's always very level-headed and, he'll be there with her mother. And in this moment, Colonel Brandon, is very evident how much he loves Marianne too. So he's distraught as well, but he's keeping it together to be the rock that they need at the moment. So, the carriage is here. It's early, thank God. Like, she ran downstairs to open it, and it's Willoughby. Mind you, his wedding has already taken place. What is he doing here? And he's drunk. Oh my God, no! Thankfully, when he shows up, Marianne is asleep. And it's the first night Marianne has actually been able to sleep because of this fever. So Eleanor is standing there. She's like, you have to leave right now. Like, what are you doing? And he was like, I know you must hate me. And she was like, yeah, we all do. And he was like, well, allow me to explain myself so that you may not hate me as much. So basically he explains everything that they already know. And he's saying that what he felt for Marianne was genuinely real. And he married this other girl because he wanted money and he has a very lavish way of living. And, he's made a despicable mistake with that other girl. And he regrets it and everything, but he still is not going to do anything for her outside of, what her situation is. And he's marrying for money. And because he's married for money, that girl doesn't like her. He doesn't like her. That girl doesn't like him and he doesn't like her. She was like making fun of Marianne when they saw each other at the party. And she actually wrote that letter saying how there were no feelings ever on his side, and just made him copy it in his handwriting and then send it back with the lock of hair. And he was saying none of that was true. And I just kept thinking about, I heard that Marianne was dying and I just needed her to know that what I felt for her was real. And I'll spend the rest of my life not being happy and marrying for love, even if I was poor, would have been worth it, rather than marrying for money and being stuck with this awful woman that I'm with. And what Eleanor thinks in particular, Eleanor made no answer. Her thoughts were now silently fixed on the irreparable injury which too early in independence and its consequent habits of idleness, dissipation, and luxury had made in the mind, the character, the happiness of a man who, to every advantage of person and talents, united a disposition naturally open and honest, and a feeling, affectionate temper. The world had made him extravagant and vain. Extravagance and vanity had made him cold-hearted and selfish. Vanity, while seeking its own guilty triumph at the expense of another, had involved him in a real attachment, which extravagance, or at least its offspring necessity, had required to be sacrificed. Each faulty propensity in leading him to evil had led him likewise to punishment. The attachment from which, against honor, against feeling, against every better interest he had outwardly torn himself, now, when no longer allowable, governed every thought, and the connection for the sake of which he had, with little scruple, left her sister to misery, was likely to prove a source of unhappiness to himself of a far more incurable nature. From a reverie of this, she was recalled at the end of some minutes by Willoughby, who, rousing himself from a reverie at least equally painful, started up in preparation for going. There's a lesson in there. Essentially, this man who has lived his life selfishly found something great, stumbled upon something great in that connection with Marianne, genuine love and connection, and ended up having to sacrifice it because of the choices that he made. That's some powerful stuff. Well, Marianne does end up recovering, and she recovers right as her mother comes to the house, and her mother is just resolved that she's dead, but she's not, and her mother is so happy about it, and they're all very happy together. And then they leave eventually to go to their cottage. Then there's more. They get to the cottage, and Marianne is much more level-headed now after everything. She's like, I didn't take care of myself because I was so distraught about Willoughby, and that made me catch this random fever that almost led to my death. So, I'm gonna take care of myself, and I'm gonna, read my books and practice my music and just, be busy and do things for myself, essentially. And she's able to talk about Willoughby without being distraught. She's using her head a little bit more, which is, the lesson that she always needed. And she was like, I just wish I knew. I wish I knew if it was real or not, And Eleanor is now harboring yet another secret because she doesn't want to tell her sister something that is so distressing, that it was real, and that the reason that they can't be together is because of this man's lack of character, which, is something that you can't marry a man who has a lack of character, but it does suck when you really did like him and you kind of have to come to terms with that what you had was real, but it can never be because he doesn't have the character that would produce a healthy relationship or even a healthy life. Eleanor talks about how even if he had ended up with you, because he has such an extravagant lifestyle and he's very selfish and he just spends on himself and he doesn't really care about expenses or other people, that she would have to be the person who had to say no to these expenses eventually, and then that's going to make him resent her, and they're going to be living in poverty, and she's going to be expected to make every sacrifice because he'll never make a sacrifice, and it's just it would have been a nightmare. And she understands that, and she begins to make peace with that. And she takes the news well. She's a little bit hurt by it, who wouldn't be, but she takes the news very well. And then another person shows up at the door, a messenger of sorts, an acquaintance, bringing the news of the fact that Mrs. Lucy Ferrars is married. And Eleanor kind of doesn't believe it because she's like, this all just seems so ridiculous that he would be someone that went for someone like her in terms of their personalities and the way that they act, etc., etc. They're married, Mrs. Lucy Ferrars, but they were like, yeah, and Edward Ferrars. And they were like, yeah, I assume that's who it was in the carriage, but they didn't see the two of them together, which was a little weird, but they were off somewhere else going south. That's why it is such a shock that Mr. Edward Ferrars shows up at their door. Everyone is shocked, and at this point, Marianne has learned of Eleanor's feelings for Edward and how Lucy is engaged to him, and she's like, as soon as she found out actually about Lucy's engagement, she was like, Eleanor, but I thought Eleanor liked him. And then she was like, you've been carrying this secret and I have been, throwing my emotional weight at you. You've been dealing with me acting like this and then suffering in silence. Like, she can't believe it. And she is overcome with guilt by that earlier. And now she's seeing him and she has to leave, because she has so much emotion in her face. And her mother too is like, oh my goodness, because her mother knew that they liked each other, but she, never knew the extent of it because Eleanor is not as expressive as Marianne. And Edward is of course not sure how he's going to be received. And he was like, yeah, so he was like, how are you? And she was like, oh, you are married. We saw Mrs. Lucy Ferrars. And he was like, yes, Lucy has married, I think there may have been some confusion, to Mr. Robert Ferrars, his older brother, the heir. What? And so Eleanor is so happy that she starts crying and she has to leave the room. And that's big for Eleanor because she doesn't show emotion. And that is where her mother finally realizes that, she's been trying to take care so much of Marianne that she didn't realize how much her oldest daughter was suffering. And so that kind of hits her a little bit. But so then the truth finally comes out that Robert, thinking Lucy to be just an awful girl, and of course Edward, simple-minded Edward, gets caught up in a woman like that's clutches, is what he said. And so he met with Lucy to try and talk her out of marrying Edward so he can come back to the family. And, Lucy just said, well, maybe if you come back later, I'll change my mind. I'm close to changing my mind, but I'm not sure, basically, is what she did. So that's how she kept getting him to come back. And then slowly, instead of talking about Edward, they started talking about him. And he's the heir now, because now Edward's been cut off. And so she flatters him over and over again, and eventually he decides he wants to marry Lucy. So Lucy, apparently, she ends up writing a letter to Edward, and Edward shows Eleanor the letter. And basically Lucy is saying, like, I know you haven't liked me in a really long time. You don't actually love me. I know that. So basically I'm gonna marry your brother is what she's saying, essentially. She's like, I'm sure you won't care because I know you don't actually like me and you haven't for a really long time. So apparently what had happened was, because he was idle and he hadn't seen any other woman before, and because he had nothing else to do, he had fancied himself in love with Lucy, the childhood girl who was kind of there. His father was helping take care of her. And so what happened was, they were in love, they got into that engagement when they were young, and then 4 years passed, and he ends up meeting and spending a lot of time with Eleanor during those 4 years. And what happens is he develops feelings for Eleanor, stronger feelings than he ever had with Lucy. Wasn't sure how to deal with all of that, but his honor was preventing him from breaking an engagement, a previous promise made to another woman. But Lucy has freed him of that by running after his brother in the name of social climbing. Of course she did. Well, after all of this, Fanny and Edward's mother are happy to have Eleanor instead. They believe Robert is a bit of a disgrace. There's a bit more moving around of funds from what I understand. So Robert still has a ton of money, but, they end up trying to give him a little bit less still because they'll never consider Lucy as part of the family or something like that. But Eleanor and Edward are able to get married, and they're able to get a considerable amount of money from Edward's mother, who eventually agrees, and they're able to live in a very comfortable way. And Marianne, after a few years, Colonel Brandon still loves her, of course, as he has since meeting her. And Marianne, when she's a little bit older, kind of starts to love him back too. And eventually, as he starts getting that love from her, he stops brooding, basically, and he turns into a much more animated, a much more excited about life type of person, who that is the real reason why Marianne fell for Willoughby in the first place. And so, and feeling as she is the source of that for him, she ends up loving him even more, and eventually ends up loving him as much as she used to Willoughby. And then the two of them get married once she's a little bit older. I think she gets to like 19 or 20, and then the two of them get married. So it all ends up working out, but man, is it a wild ride. I feel like there is so much about, like, you know, learning how to deal with your emotions, about how, like, the truth of life can sometimes get in the way. Sometimes it's not anybody's fault. And I just love how there are so many characters in all of these Jane Austen books, but especially this one, that are so realistic. You can find Lucys in today's world. You can find Fannys. You can find Eleanors. You can find Mariannes. You can find Willoughbys too. So I highly recommend giving this a read. I kind of gave a little rundown on it, but seeing how it all plays out in the literature itself is deeply rewarding. I highly recommend giving it a read, and I will see you guys in the next book review video.